in 1945 is when your father made it back from this episode in Liberia behind the whiskey business that they were operating while they were soldiers. And now Captain West had become Colonel West. He was now in the United States Army Public Health Service, because back then in the 40s, the Public Health Service fell under the U.S. Army. And he wanted your dad to come back to Liberia. So he was able to come to the United States and locate your dad. And he came to him and appealed to him. And he told him, he said, now I know you like Liberia. He said, if you would be willing to come back, he said, I know what you went through, but I didn't have enough rank to do anything about it. You know, they were strong arming you and trying to take your business and that type of thing. I couldn't do anything about it. And I hated to see it, but was little I could do. He said, but if you are willing to come back, he says, they're making me a colonel in the United States Army Public Health Service. I have the position to select my officers. I can get you a commission as a second lieutenant if you want to come back. And so your dad says, well, I'll come back if my fiance wants to come back. And that was your mom. And by this time, your mom had finished her, I think, 3 years in the U.S. Army. Because when they first met in Atlanta, she was at Spelman College. And she was one of the young ladies that were part of the, I forget what they call that social organization of the military, but whatever they call it, it's the memory doesn't serve me at this point in time. She was there. And I guess that's when your dad fell in love with your mother. And so they communicated while he was overseas, but her father died around 1942. So she left Spelman College so that she could help and benefit her family, send money to them. And she went into the Army, and she was able to send money back so that her brothers and sisters could finish school and so forth. So she was about to come out of the service as well. She had been a sergeant stationed out in Salt Lake City, Utah. And when you see that picture of them, that is right about the time that she's got on her military uniform while they're sitting at a social club. And he's got on his military uniform, and I noticed that he's got a bar on his shoulder in that picture. And that's telling me that he accepted the commitment, and he and your mom had accepted the invitation from him. He said if she was willing to travel back to Liberia with him, he would come back. So that picture tells me the date is 1945. And the significance of that date to me, that date is about 3 years and 8 months. That's about 1,335 days from when I was conceived in about August 1948, because my birthday is in April, 9 months later. April 20th, 1949 was when I was born. The fascinating thing about it is your cousin over in Georgia, in Atlanta, Georgia, Rosalind, last year, I guess she was doing one of these Ancestry.com research, and she was able to pull up the ship that your mom and dad traveled on in order for him to get me back to the United States to be born in Texas, because I was born in Texas as well. I was born in Crockett, Texas, the same city that he's from. But it's interesting that they were there from 1945 until 1948. And I wasn't born until 49, almost 4 years after they went there. And it's interesting because Poindexter, again, I think he was the one whose name I remember. Your mom couldn't get pregnant all of this period of time. And he told her, he said, if you want to get pregnant, you got to get out of that Jeep that's jumping and bumping over them sand dunes that you and Tom are into, because that was their thing, get in that Jeep and get out on the sand dunes and jump from hill to hill. He said, you're not going to get pregnant that way. You need to sit down. And so she did that. Okay. So I start looking at where her conversation comes in, because it kind of gets mixed up with my dad's as well. But I think it was some of her conversation, because it could have been dad's too, because the ladies would tease your mom. They would say, the major is having a gathering, a private gathering at his house on Friday night. And they would be talking to each other. But they were doing it in a manner to embarrass your mom, because your dad was a second lieutenant, and they would, you and your husband can't come. We're sorry. He's only a second lieutenant. I guess you had to be a captain or whatever before you could get the invitation to the colonel's. I guess it was a colonel's social gathering. And so I think after a while that began to rub your mother the wrong way, because they were still young. They weren't 30 years old yet. They were pushing 30 by the time they hit 1949. Both of them would be 31 when I was born. Okay, so I think that clock was ticking in your mom's mind. Your dad, he was still kind of, he always laid back and cool with his thing, And I think because of the influence of your mom and her dissatisfaction with being fronted off by the other women and so forth, she began to talk to your dad and say, I know you know how to do more than just collect mosquito larvae and snakes. You have the intelligence to be a medical doctor. Now, I don't know if he told me that or she told me that, but that's of significance, the influence that your mother had over your father and had always had when it came to interacting with your dad. Okay. And so when I think back on it, I think that when she said that to him and he wanted to please her, I think that it evoked some thoughts of when he was a child. He said that when they were little kids, while they were like 4, 5, 6 years old, the elders in the community would tell them that this kid here is going to be our doctor and this kid here is going to be our lawyer. You see, they were talking about your Uncle Arnim. He's 9 months younger than your father, you see. And it's interesting that they became what these people said. But I think that was kind of the trigger that impacted your dad, besides your mom being pregnant with me at the time, and his recognizing that it's in our best interest to get on board one of these ships and get back to the United States.